This story will leave you questioning everything about love and trust. A story so chilling it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about trust. What happens when a man who dedicates his life to creating families becomes the prime suspect in destroying his own? Dr. Scott Sills wasn't just another medical professional, he was a miracle worker who helped countless couples experience the joy of parenthood. But on one summer morning in 2016, everything would unravel in ways no one could have predicted. A single 911 call, a wife found dead at the bottom of the stairs, a crime scene that would puzzle investigators for years. Was this a tragic accident or something far more sinister? The line between love and murder has never been so razor thin. Imagine a marriage built on success, professional achievements, and seemingly perfect partnership. Now watch it crumble under the weight of a single devastating investigation. From fertility specialist to potential killer, Scott Sills' story is a journey into the darkest corners of human betrayal. How well do you really know the person sleeping next to you? What secrets could be hiding behind a smile, a professional reputation, or a loving family photo? This isn't just another true crime story. This is a deep dive into a case that will challenge everything you believe about relationships, trust, and the masks people wear. Every twist will leave you questioning, who is the real victim? If you're into true crime that keeps you guessing until the very last moment, this is your story. Don't miss a single detail. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and share this with anyone who loves a mystery that's more shocking than fiction. Prepare yourself for a journey into a world where love can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. Sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. What appears to be a simple accident might actually hide a much darker truth. In cases like these, the most challenging aspect is often the division within a family itself, where even those closest to the accused cannot agree on what truly happened. Some family members staunchly defend their loved one's innocence, while others silently nurse deep-seated suspicions. For investigators, the task becomes a delicate dance of separating cold, hard facts from emotional narratives. The boundary between a tragic accident and a calculated crime can be incredibly thin, requiring meticulous attention to every minute detail. The story begins on a seemingly peaceful Sunday morning of July 13, 2016, in San Clemente, California, a town renowned for its tranquil lifestyle and reputation as a safe haven for families. Residents believed they lived in an idyllic community where children could grow up sheltered and secure. Little did they know that this particular morning would shatter their comfortable illusions forever. At precisely 9 a.m., a distressed man named Dr. Scott Sills, a professional in reproductive medicine, made a frantic 911 call. His urgent report described a horrifying scenario. His wife Susan had supposedly fallen down the stairs and was now lying unconscious, seemingly lifeless. Utilizing the speakerphone, Scott allowed the emergency dispatcher to guide him through potential first aid procedures while awaiting paramedics. Scott claimed that after initial resuscitation attempts, Susan had shown faint signs of life. However, when medical professionals arrived, they were confronted with a drastically different scene. Susan was already deceased, her body clothed and surrounded by peculiar items, a stainless steel pot, a wallet, an empty medication container, and a scarf. What immediately caught the professionals' attention was the pot's unusual positioning, standing perfectly upright next to the corpse, as if intentionally placed. But even more alarming were the distinct marks on Susan's neck, which looked unmistakably like strangulation traces. These marks could not possibly have been caused by a simple accidental fall. Scott's explanation was that Susan was preparing for her routine morning dog walk when the incident occurred. He suggested that perhaps the dogs might have pulled her scarf during the fall, leading to accidental suffocation. However, the responding police officers found his narrative highly unconvincing, sensing that something far more sinister might have transpired. The police officers found it hard to believe that dogs could cause such precise strangulation marks. Their instincts suggested a more sinister scenario. Susan might have been murdered, with her husband Scott potentially involved. Their first priority was to thoroughly verify Scott's account of events. While a fall from over 13 feet could theoretically cause fatal injuries, something didn't add up. Susan was a 45-year-old woman in peak physical condition, familiar with these stairs and typically careful. The multiple bruises scattered across her body, on her face, back, arms, and legs, simply couldn't be explained by a single accidental fall. Scott's demeanor raised even more red flags. He appeared remarkably composed for someone who had just lost his wife tragically. Despite his apparent willingness to cooperate by allowing searches and DNA testing, the underlying suspicion of his involvement lingered uncomfortably in the air. Simultaneously, investigators began interviewing the couple's 12-year-old twins, Eric and Mary Catherine. The teenagers shared that Susan had been experiencing a severe migraine the previous evening, a condition she suffered from periodically. The intense pain had driven her to rest in her daughter's dark, quiet room. Susan had brought a pot with her, anticipating potential nausea, and carried her pain medication. The children described their parents' relationship as warm and loving, emphasizing that serious arguments were rare in their household. Their account painted a picture of a close-knit, supportive family. Piecing together the family's testimony, investigators reconstructed the night's events. On Saturday evening, exhausted by her migraine, Susan had fallen asleep in Mary Catherine's bedroom, the darkest and quietest space in the house. At midnight, Scott had checked on her, finding her already asleep. Mary Catherine then decided to spend the night in her parents' bedroom, leaving her mother a tender, handwritten note. The note was filled with wishes for a quick recovery and expressions of love, a touching detail that added a layer of emotional complexity to the unfolding mystery. Around 4 in the morning, Eric was suddenly awakened by loud voices coming from his parents' room, a detail that would prove crucial in understanding the night's events. Eric wasn't certain whether his parents were fighting or just having a heated discussion. The voices were brief and indistinct. Shortly after, Scott entered Mary Catherine's bedroom, where she was resting. When his daughter inquired about the commotion, Scott downplayed the incident, explaining it was a minor disagreement about a work-related email. He reassured Mary Catherine there was nothing to worry about. However, despite the seemingly calm explanation, law enforcement remained deeply skeptical. Too many questions hung in the air. How could Susan have sustained such severe injuries from a simple fall? What explained the strangulation-like marks on her neck? Why were those mysterious objects positioned so strangely near her body? Scott's unnaturally calm demeanor following his wife's death only deepened the investigation's complexity. This was far from a straightforward case, and detectives knew they had extensive work ahead to unravel the truth. During questioning, Scott revealed more details about that night. Around 4 a.m., he had found Susan working on her laptop, despite suffering from an intense migraine. He had tried repeatedly to convince her to rest, but Susan was characteristically stubborn, refusing to prioritize her health. Their disagreement had escalated, leading to a tense argument. Eventually, the family settled back to sleep. At 6:30 in the morning, Scott casually suggested swimming to Mary Catherine. But when the girl emerged from her parents' bedroom, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Her mother lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs, a long scarf wrapped around her neck, a pot positioned nearby. Terrified, Mary Catherine screamed and called for her father. Scott offered an elaborate explanation, claiming Susan often used the scarf during migraine attacks, wrapping it around her head. He suggested the scarf belonged to their daughter and speculated about a freak accident. Perhaps the family pets had somehow caused Susan to fall and become entangled in the scarf. Yet, each explanation seemed more implausible than the last. The circumstances surrounding Susan's death were becoming increasingly suspicious, with each detail raising more questions than answers. Suspicious details began stacking up like a precarious house of cards. One glaring inconsistency was the metal pot Susan supposedly carried. If it had tumbled down the stairs with her, why hadn't anyone heard its loud, clattering descent? Metal against tile would create a thunderous noise that should have jolted the entire household awake. Adding to the oddities, Susan was wearing a warm scarf in the middle of a summer morning, a detail that struck investigators as peculiar. Meanwhile, Scott himself became a person of interest. He sported a fresh cut on his forehead and a substantial bruise on his arm, which he attributed to car repair work done with his son Eric the previous day. But Eric's statement contradicted his father's story completely. The boy told investigators that during their time in the garage, Scott had not sustained any injuries. They had entered the house together, and Eric was certain his father was unharmed throughout their entire interaction. Another puzzling detail emerged from Eric's account. Just hours before the tragedy, he had witnessed Susan locking the dogs in their cage, a routine that typically meant the animals would immediately settle down to sleep. He couldn't comprehend why his mother would suddenly decide to walk the dog so early, especially given her weakened state from the migraine. Forensic experts discovered something even more troubling while searching Mary Catherine's bedroom. Suspicious bloodstains marked the curtains, walls, and bedside table. Mary Catherine adamantly insisted the room was pristine when her mother had come to rest there. Scott attempted to explain these as old stains from an incident last spring when he had accidentally cut himself while changing a window screen. However, these blood marks appeared fresh and recent, not months old as Scott claimed. Despite the mounting suspicions, these findings were not enough to formally charge or arrest Scott. Susan's body was sent to the medical examiner's laboratory, and the police temporarily withdrew from the Sills home. 4 days later, the forensic examination concluded, but it provided no definitive answers. Susan's body bore numerous injuries that could have resulted from a fall, a beating, or strangulation. The most critical damage was a spine fracture at the neck's base, an injury that could potentially explain the strange marks found on her neck. The medical examination revealed ruptured blood vessels in Susan's eyes, a typical indicator of asphyxiation. However, the forensic specialist remained hesitant to declare whether these injuries were the result of a tragic accident or clear evidence of a crime. A comprehensive analysis of all traces could potentially take months to complete. Investigators were cautious, understanding the case's complexity and avoiding rushed judgments. They meticulously examined every piece of evidence collected from the Sills home. The mysterious bloodstains became a primary focus, along with Susan's phone and laptop, which were seized for detailed investigation. Neighborhood interviews proved frustratingly unproductive. The Sills were known as a couple who kept to themselves, working extensively and maintaining minimal contact with surrounding residents. No neighbors reported hearing anything unusual during the night or on the evening preceding the tragedy. Shifting their approach, investigators began tracing Susan's professional networks and medical contacts. This strategy proved unexpectedly fruitful when they discovered a witness who could potentially illuminate the true nature of the couple's relationship. Scott's professional reputation painted a dramatically different picture. His students described him as a charismatic and kind-hearted educator who consistently appeared for lectures immaculately dressed in elegant three-piece suits. Many students had encountered him outside classroom settings, unanimously describing him as compassionate and understanding. One touching account came from a student from a financially challenged background. She shared how Scott had repeatedly helped her during difficult times, lending money for lunch or taxi fare, demonstrating remarkable empathy and generosity. Scott's personal journey seemed destined for success from the beginning. After graduating high school with exceptional performance, he pursued an unconventional path, first studying law before transitioning to medical school. His sharp intellect, unwavering determination, and remarkable work ethic propelled him to become a respected reproductive medicine specialist. It was through his professional work that Scott met Susan. A few years before the tragic events, she had visited his medical center struggling with infertility issues from her previous marriage. At the time of their meeting, Susan had recently completed her Master of Business Administration, bringing her own professional accomplishments to their relationship. Their relationship began uniquely, a medical professional and his patient finding love. Scott initially supervised Susan's fertility treatment, and gradually, a deep romantic connection blossomed. Susan didn't hesitate to file for divorce from her first husband, recognizing in Scott something extraordinary. Susan was more than just a beautiful woman. She was witty, cheerful, and incredibly kind. When Scott first introduced her at a school reunion, everyone was struck by their remarkable chemistry. Their eventual wedding announcement felt like a natural progression for those who knew them. Scott's medical expertise proved transformative in Susan's life. Through IVF, he helped her overcome her fertility challenges, resulting in the birth of their beloved twins. This success convinced Susan that her husband was nothing short of a medical genius, capable of helping countless women struggling with similar issues. Inspired by their shared vision, they launched their own reproductive medicine clinic in April 2015. Susan's business acumen perfectly complemented Scott's medical skills. While he performed medical procedures, she managed the business operations, creating a powerful professional partnership. Their combined efforts quickly translated into financial success. They purchased a luxurious home in an upscale neighborhood, and Scott developed a passion for collecting expensive cars. The Sills family enjoyed a lifestyle of comfort and abundance, wanting for nothing. Scott's professional reputation soared. He became a recognizable figure, frequently appearing on television, publishing books, and contributing to medical publications. Colleagues and the public alike viewed him as a top-tier expert in reproductive medicine. Their relationship seemed like a perfect partnership, an intelligent, supportive couple working in harmony. However, tensions began to emerge shortly before the tragedy. A mysterious photograph on Susan's social media sparked disputes between them, and friends noticed a growing strain in their relationship. When news of Susan's death spread, most of her relatives and acquaintances initially believed it was a tragic accident. But as detectives began interviewing witnesses, a different picture emerged. Scott's absolute refusal to discuss the incident raised red flags, transforming initial sympathy into suspicion. By the time investigators completed their initial interviews, they were increasingly convinced they were not investigating an accident, but a potential murder. Forensic experts were repeatedly struck by Scott's unusual behavior. Unlike a typical grieving husband, he displayed an unsettling emotional detachment. When discussing Susan, he spoke exclusively in professional terms, describing her as a business partner rather than a loving wife and devoted mother. It was as if the emotional connection between them had been reduced to a mere working relationship. The clinic staff were shocked by Scott's seemingly callous response to his wife's death. Incredibly, he arrived at work the very next morning as if nothing extraordinary had happened. While everyone expected him to take time off to process his grief, Scott carried on with complete indifference, behaving as though Susan's death was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The clinic manager and several employees shared their observations with investigators. A nurse who had worked closely with Scott provided particularly revealing insights. She noted that he systematically avoided any discussions about Susan, creating an atmosphere of uncomfortable silence around her memory. Even more bizarre was Scott's rapid physical transformation. Before Susan's death, he had been an ordinary, balding man. Shortly after her passing, he underwent a dramatic hair transplant, emerging with a full head of hair that seemed to symbolize a complete personal reinvention. His social media presence underwent a similar transformation, carefully curated but devoid of any genuine mourning. Instead of displaying grief, Scott appeared to be actively pursuing a new life. He began frequenting the gym, dining at trendy restaurants, and updating his wardrobe with stylish clothing. It seemed he was not mourning his wife, but preparing to find a new partner. And indeed, a new girlfriend soon entered the picture, with their relationship developing with remarkable speed. Despite the mounting suspicions, the police felt they lacked sufficient evidence to take action. They needed to compile and synthesize all available information, searching for conclusive proof. In 2018, a breakthrough arrived with the coroner's in-depth analysis. The forensic expert definitively concluded that Susan had died from strangulation, with clear postmortem marks on her neck. Even more damning, DNA testing revealed that the blood in Mary Catherine's room belonged to both Susan and Scott, strongly suggesting a violent confrontation that had ended in murder. On August 8, 2018, nearly 2 years after Susan's death, detectives confronted Scott directly about his wife's murder. The moment they posed the question, Scott's demeanor dramatically changed. He began sweating profusely, his body language shifting to a defensive posture. Despite the mounting evidence, he continued to deny any involvement. Scott's explanation for the bloodstains remained consistent, claiming they resulted from an accidental injury while changing a window screen. But this story crumbled when confronted with a critical inconsistency. Mary Catherine had insisted no such stains existed before the police investigation. Investigators decided to dig deeper, thoroughly examining Susan's phone and social media accounts. What they discovered painted a troubling picture of their relationship's deterioration. Nearly 3 months before her death, Susan had begun confiding in friends about feeling trapped in her marriage and contemplating divorce. Her messages revealed increasing tension with Scott. A month before the tragedy, she candidly shared with a close friend that their relationship had become unbearable. Susan claimed Scott was preventing her from leaving primarily because he didn't want to lose their joint business. The source of their conflict? A controversial photograph. Susan had apparently posted the image after losing a bet, a decision that infuriated Scott. Investigators found a screenshot of this photo dated August 30th, 2016, suggesting it could have been a potential motive for murder. Adding to the suspicion, Scott attempted to claim Susan's life insurance policy, valued at $250,000, the very next day after her death. His claim was immediately denied due to the circumstances surrounding her death. The investigation culminated on April 25, 2019. 2.5 years after Susan's death, Dr. Scott Sills was arrested while en route to a medical operation. He was taken into custody with a bail set at $1 million, bringing a dramatic turn to a case that had lingered in uncertainty for years. Scott quickly posted the $1 million bail and was released, awaiting trial. As news of his legal troubles spread, an unexpected witness emerged, a woman who revealed her previous affair with Scott during Susan's lifetime. She explained that their relationship began through social media, with Scott initially appearing attentive and caring. However, he had abruptly terminated their connection. Critically, she provided investigators with a message Scott had sent 2 weeks after Susan's death, brazenly suggesting they resume their relationship now that he was free. Detectives began exploring potential motives. They speculated that Scott might have killed Susan to avoid property division during a potential divorce, or to eliminate a barrier to his interactions with other women. Scott had already retained a lawyer who attempted to paint the message as a grieving father's misguided attempt to find a new mother for his children. 7 years after Susan's death in November 2023, the case finally went to trial. Although Scott strongly opposed media attention and visibly struggled with the constant scrutiny, cameras were permitted in the courtroom. In the intervening years, he had lost his medical license and appeared significantly diminished. The prosecutor presented a chilling narrative. According to their theory, on November 13, 2016, around 4 a.m., when Eric had heard his parents arguing, Scott had attacked Susan in his daughter's room. They alleged he had struck her multiple times before strangling her, subsequently staging the scene to look like an accident. In contrast, Scott's defense lawyer offered a dramatically different interpretation. He argued that Susan, weakened by medication and migraines, had attempted to navigate the stairs that morning to retrieve her pot. According to this version, she had fallen due to her compromised state and the family dogs, perceiving her movement as a game, and had inadvertently strangled her by pulling her scarf. Most surprisingly, Mary Catherine unexpectedly supported her father's version of events, adding another layer of complexity to the already intricate case. Now, 19 years old, Mary Catherine remained deeply connected to her father. She recounted a crucial detail from that fateful morning 7 years ago, witnessing the dogs pulling at the scarf around her unconscious mother's neck. At the time, she hadn't comprehended the significance of what she was seeing. Mary Catherine explained her silence, stating that investigators had never directly asked her about that specific moment. As a child during Susan's death, she simply hadn't understood the importance of her observations. She added that they had removed the scarf from her mother's neck during initial first aid attempts, explaining why it was found separate from the body. The defense strategically conducted a DNA test on the scarf, which returned a positive result for dog traces. The toxicological examination partially supported their accidental fall theory. Susan's blood contained a mixture of sedatives and painkillers, which could have significantly impaired her muscle control and balance. In the days leading up to her death, Susan had been weak and barely eating. These factors could have easily contributed to a catastrophic loss of balance on the stairs. The injury to her neck was severe enough to potentially cause suffocation, even without external intervention. From the defense's perspective, the dogs played a minimal role in the tragedy. They argued that even without the dog's involvement, Susan might have died due to her compromised physical condition. The fact that no one heard her fall seemed to support their version of events. The prosecutor remained unconvinced, challenging the theory. He argued that a fall involving a metal pot would have created a loud noise. The prosecution remained convinced that Scott had used the scarf to strangle his wife. Mary Catherine countered this, explaining that her mother often wrapped herself in the scarf during migraine attacks, finding comfort in its embrace. The prosecution's most compelling evidence emerged during the House examination. Surprisingly, not a single trace of Susan's DNA was found on the 13-foot staircase. If she had truly fallen, investigators would have expected to find blood drops or other biological traces. Their absence raised significant questions. The prosecution's theory was stark. Scott had deliberately moved Susan's body to stage her fall. They highlighted a critical inconsistency with the 911 call. While the dispatcher had instructed Scott to perform CPR on a flat surface, when medics arrived, Susan's leg remained positioned on a step. This suggested Scott had not genuinely attempted to help her, but was merely creating an illusion of an accidental death. Scott's lawyer contested the blood evidence in Mary Catherine's room. arguing it could have been deposited accidentally and not necessarily during a violent confrontation. However, the prosecution pressed forward, emphasizing Scott's potential motive, the mysterious photograph that had supposedly triggered his jealousy and rage. The credibility of Eric's testimony about his father's car repair injuries was also challenged. After all, they were discussing a teenager who could have easily missed or misremembered details. Scott made the strategic decision not to testify during the 3-week trial, leaving many questions unanswered. After intense closing arguments, the fate of the case rested with the jury. Following 3 hours of deliberation, they reached a complex verdict. While finding Scott not guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, they convicted him of second-degree murder, a devastating conclusion for a man who had helped bring hundreds of babies into the world through his IVF practice. The sentence was life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the verdict, Mary Catherine broke down in the courtroom. At just 19, she was now grieving the loss of both parents. Convinced of a miscarriage of justice, she declared her intention to continue fighting alongside Scott's lawyer. Despite her protests, the sentence remained unchanged. Susan Sill's death and subsequent trial exposed a haunting truth that seemingly perfect families can conceal dark, unimaginable secrets. The tragedy deeply affected the quiet Californian town of San Clemente, leaving an indelible mark on its community. A once celebrated reproductive specialist who had helped numerous couples become parents would now spend at least 15 years behind bars. While his daughter Mary Catherine continues to champion his innocence, the court's verdict stands resolute and unchanging. This chilling story offers profound lessons about human relationships and hidden truths. It serves as a stark reminder that even the most seemingly perfect marriages can harbor dark, toxic undercurrents. Seemingly successful couples might be concealing dangerous dynamics beneath a polished exterior. The case underscores the critical importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships. Small behavioral changes, unexplained tensions, or sudden shifts in communication can be early indicators of deeper problems. Ignoring these subtle signals can potentially lead to catastrophic consequences. Moreover, the investigation highlights the meticulous nature of criminal justice. Sometimes solving a complex case hinges on the most minute details, a misplaced object, an inconsistent statement, or an overlooked piece of evidence. Careful, patient investigation can ultimately unveil the truth, no matter how well it might be concealed. Scott and Susan's story is a haunting testament to the complexity of human relationships. It reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, and that beneath the surface of professional success and apparent happiness, profound personal tragedies can unfold. As we close this shocking chapter of Dr. Scott Sill's life, one haunting question remains: how does a man who dedicated his entire career to creating life end up destroying the most important life next to him? The courtroom's final verdict, second-degree murder, wasn't just a judgment on Scott, but a stark reminder of how fragile human relationships can be. A celebrated reproductive specialist once revered for bringing hundreds of babies into the world, now confined behind prison walls for at least 15 years. Mary Catherine, now 19, stands as the most heart-wrenching casualty. Losing her mother and watching her father convicted, she remains convinced of a miscarriage of justice. Her unwavering support for Scott speaks volumes about the complex emotional landscape of family dynamics. But this story is more than just a crime narrative. It's a chilling lesson about hidden truths. Those picture-perfect marriages we admire from the outside, they can harbor the darkest secrets. Professional success, wealth, and social status mean nothing when trust is fundamentally broken. The Sills case reminds us that warning signs often whisper before they scream. Small behavioral changes, unexplained tensions, sudden communication shifts, these are not just random moments, but potential indicators of deeper, more dangerous dynamics. For every viewer watching, take this as a critical life lesson. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to the subtle signs. Not every danger announces itself with loud sirens. Sometimes it creeps in silently, wearing a familiar face. Scott Sill's story isn't just about a murder. It's about the thin line between love and destruction, between professional brilliance and personal darkness. Before you go, if this story moved you, shocked you, or made you think, please hit that subscribe button, share this video, because awareness is our greatest weapon against darkness. Some stories are meant to be told, some truths must be heard. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware.